usually when we do the Tomoe-ro Shinobi Keiko, if you go from years back, we tend to have this huge, like, what is it? Kind of this real focused on like ninjutsu and, you know, the stealth walking and all that kind of stuff. And obviously that's part of the school. That is what makes up this tradition, right? But when you look at the history of Tomoe-ro, we have different scrolls. And those scrolls, some of them are very old, some of them are not very old, right? The scroll that we're going to be working out the most for the next 2 days is going to be the Jisengata. Now, the reason I'm choosing that over all the rest of the stuff, and why we're going to really focus on that one particular scroll the most, okay, is because that is the newest addition to the school. It was added to the school about mid to late 1890s. Okay, that's when that particular scroll was written. Okay, so the late 1800s. And the reason that's important is because of what we're going through right now, with all the political mess and the social mess that we're going through and all these kind of things. There's so many changes, there's so much uncertainty. When you go back and you look at the history of ninja and samurai, that's one of the reasons why these warriors fought. It wasn't just for control of land, but it was also the right to live, right? And when you start looking at this idea of ninjutsu, sometimes people tend to get this idea that, well, I want to study ninjutsu, but I'm only going to study ninjutsu from this period, or this period, or this period. That's it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's like someone saying, well, I want to drive a car from, you know, I like 80s rock, or I like 90s hip hop, or I like, you know, or I want to drive a Model T Ford, or I want to drive, you know what I'm saying? There's nothing wrong with having a taste of a certain time period. What I don't think is appropriate is when you have these individuals and groups, and training groups, and schools, and all this kind of thing, when they say, well, we're only going to study from, an example, the Sengoku Jidai, and then that's it. Well, you're getting a very limited view of ninjutsu, because ninjutsu didn't stop then. It was there, but it continued to grow. And the schools that didn't adapt and continue on are the ones that died out. So that's why we have things like the Bon Senshukai or the Shoninki or the Nippuden, because those are ryuha that did not adapt to the time period, and therefore they died out. So now they're public records, right? The schools that did adapt over time, so they can maintain a tradition and maintain a way of being able to transmit these old teachings from one to the next to save the next generation. Those are the ones that lived on. And that's why when you see people, like you take this this idea, if you want to sit cross-legged, man, you're looking rough there, buddy.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
There you go. Yeah, that's fine too. Yeah, if you guys want to sit like that too, it's fine too. But when you look at some of these modern schools I say modern schools, but when you look at the more modern ninjutsu organizations, right? The one thing that what you see is a lot of people are studying taijutsu. You guys heard me say a million times, taijutsu is not ninjutsu. However, you cannot study ninjutsu without studying taijutsu, right? Bujutsu is not ninjutsu either, but you can't study ninjutsu without studying bujutsu. There are certain things that they have to be taught in compendium or with one another to be able to understand its truth, right? So it just gives a more deeper look at the skill set of what you're supposed to have. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So when you look at ninjutsu, and there's a point in time where, okay, the Edo period stops, and from the Edo period we go to the Meiji Restoration, the Meiji period. And that's where you get all these dramas and animes where you got the wandering samurai and that sort of thing, you know, and that this time period of peace kind of goes on. And we see these stories, you know, during this time period, the late Edo period, early Meiji period. Well, things also changed a lot politically in Japan's history. That's where we get what they call the gentleman arts, or the do arts. And do in Japan means like the way. So it's like we see karate do, aikido, kendo, judo, iaido. And those particular methods, or in Chinese they call it the Tao. It's the same exact kanji. It means the way of enlightenment. And their training is a method of training towards enlightenment using martial arts, and that became the new rage in the Meiji period. In fact, it became illegal to even teach like the ancient samurai and the ancient ninja methods. You just couldn't do it. You know, so the only way it even lived on is when you had certain individuals that decided to say, I don't trust the government. And I've busted my ass my whole life to learn these methods of war. How can I take this method and teach it to my students and the next generation, but doing it in a way that it can be disguised to where it makes them think it's okay? Well, the easiest adaptation to that is taijutsu, right? So when you go down the line, you see lots of teachers who went from Edo period, okay, Meiji period, not okay. And that date isn't hard set, it was different for different areas of Japan. But you see Nakashima Sensei and the way that he added the Jisengata to the Tomoru. But the Jisengata in Tomoru was the newest scroll. And Nakashima Sensei, when he writes this particular scroll, it's comprised, right? It's comprised of 5 different areas. And those 5 areas is what makes up the Jisengata. One of those 5 areas, anyone who studies with the Budokai, whether they're in the online ninjutsu dojo or they're here or any other dojo, you guys know that you study the Taijutsu Kimiyagoki. The Taijutsu Kimiyagoki is one of the 5 areas of the Jisengata. So when you look at the Jisengata, you have Kamai, which you guys know you have Taijutsu Kimikamai, Tojutsu Kimikamai, Bojutsu Kimikamai, right? And then you have the Kata, which is Taijutsu Kimiyagoki, Tojutsu Gata, Bojutsu Gata, right? You guys understand what I'm saying? The Kusuri Buki Gata, the Kakushi Buki Gata, da, da, da. So when you look at those sections, that's those 5 areas, or the 5 areas that comprise the Jisengata. And they were comprised and made at a time to make sure that the transmission of this art can still make it to the next generation. Everybody knows to live, you have to adapt. If you don't adapt, you die. Right? Everything that's now old, we don't use anymore because there wasn't an adaptation of it. Modern day computers is an adaptation, if you will, or a hinka of a typewriter. They adapted the idea and it became what it is, right? But then there's certain things that we just don't do anymore because we don't need to anymore. It died out. This year's camp, I really want to focus on that particular scroll. And I know usually we get up here, we're always doing the old stuff. We're doing the stealth and we're doing the, and all that kind of thing. And I think we're still going to do that. I'm not saying we're not doing that. But I want the focus to be on why the tradition is still here today. And I think the time that we're living in really makes it so obvious as to why the tradition is still here. And the need and the necessity for it. Because if anybody truly thinks the government is going to save them, I think they're not, that's incorrect. You know what I mean? You are the first responder. Period. So you have to have those skills, And that's why I think we need to focus on that. Now, I always start with the reading. And I always read from the Shoden no Maki, right? I'm sure you guys all have the Shoden no Maki. And the first paragraph, I always read it because I think it sets the tone. You know what I mean? The historical aspect. So I'll read that real quick. According to legend, the origins of the Tomoru tradition of Shinobi Jutsu was developed in the Kimu Restoration as a samurai tradition that had its focus on the use of a short sword, kodachi, as well as several different buki, old weapons. It was during this time, 1333 to 1336, in the Shiga Prefecture of Japan that Gohei Tomo and 2 other samurai, Jinsuke Tomo and Senrai Akutagawa, developed this method of warfare to serve as a means of self-protection for their families, their village, and their lord. As Japan entered the Sengoku period, it was during this time that the art flourished, and other areas such as Boryaku, which is tactics, Choho, espionage, Intan Jutsu, escape and concealment, and Zetsumi Jutsu, assassination, became the strength of this samurai tradition. It was these methods of guerrilla tactics that would later become known as Tomoru Shinobi Jutsu. The reason we take this big stance that ninja are samurai, everyone takes a different stance. There's actually 3 stances, but let me explain why I'm hard set that ninja are samurai. Okay? Because there are different ways of looking at it. We take a hard set that ninjutsu, or the ninja, were samurai. And the reason we take that is because in this school, in the Budokai, the main tradition that's taught is Tomoru Shinobi Jutsu. And in this tradition, in Tomoru, it was a samurai tradition. They were samurai. Originally, like the history says, it was a Kodachi school. The older techniques that we have, the scrolls that have the oldest techniques, it's actually short sword techniques, short sword fighting. It's a sword school. And they did everything else. It's not like all the other sword schools that you see, whether it's Eshin Ryu or Mugai Ryu or Kage Ryu or Katori Shinto Ryu or whatever. They were samurai. There were sword schools that taught multiple skills. So just because it focused on the short sword didn't mean that that's the one thing they taught. That was just its focus. Does it catch what I'm saying with that? So, but what ends up happening is the Tomoru originally was called Otomo. Then the emperor called their name for some reason or another incorrectly. Now, this particular scroll I translated, and it's in the Shinobi no Michi. So we've got the scroll translated, this document translated, and it clearly says Otomo Ryu changed their name to Tomo Ryu. And the emperor said their name incorrectly for whatever reason politically, and that's why they went from Otomo to Tomo. So a lot of things changed politically during that time too. They started out in 1333 to 1336. That was before the Sengoku Jidai. So even though they started in the 1300s, the 1500s was, 1400s, 1500s, that's where you see the massive amount of war. So they established themselves a very strong samurai tradition, and then they lose their position politically. They're not Otomo. O means like major. Like like sensei is the great teacher, right? Soji is like great, cleaning, that means something of the divine. They lost the O part for one political reason or another. And then things started changing for them. So now they're Tomoryu. So now they have to start adding new things to the tradition to keep money coming in. They have land they got to take care of, animals they got to take care of, family they got to take care of. They need to create money to be able to do those things. It's just the same kind of thing here, you know what I mean? So because of that, other things tend to become a strength. So now they start doing things like concealment, espionage, Zetsumi Jutsu, Inton Jutsu, Inpo, Tanpo, all that kind of stuff. And those became now they started becoming known for that. Do you catch what I mean? And then that gets into where we are today. So even though we have all this material, older scrolls, ninjutsu scrolls, all this kind of thing, what we're going to be focusing on for the most part from a physical perspective this year is that Jisen Gata. Because the reason it was written is to survive in a time that it wasn't supposed to survive. And I just kind of feel like right now we need to train in a time where I don't think some groups of people really care whether we survive or not. And I think giving that back is the most important aspect.